Alright, welcome back to the Exposing Scum Landlords channel. Once again, I am the co-coordinator and founder, Aaron Crane, of the project. So today, once again, we're going to be doing some reacts. So specifically, we're going to be reacting to a video called... let me get it shared here. Six not so obvious tips from experienced landlords. All right. So this is from a site called BiggerPockets, or a YouTube channel called BiggerPockets. It is based in the States, so again, we are going to be looking at it from an Ontario perspective. As with all of our React videos, and all of our information will be from the perspective of tenants' rights in Ontario, Canada, as that's where I'm based. Toronto, Ontario, Canada, the capital city of Ontario. I'm only a few blocks away from Queen's Park. All right, here we go. So, 6 not so obvious tips from experienced landlords. I just want to remind everyone watching that the Exposing Scum Landlords project, its organizers, participants, and members, when talking, we are not giving legal advice, so do not take this as legal advice. Take this as guidance. If you need serious help, please feel free to contact your local legal aid clinic, or you can Google pro bono, PROBONO, Ontario, and that will give you a list of the legal aid and pro bono lawyers and paralegals in Ontario. Obviously, pro bono means that they are offering their services free of charge. And once again, even if anyone giving advice on the website or the YouTube channel is a lawyer, paralegal, or else other person involved in the practice of law, unless you are a client of theirs, they are still not giving legal advice. Names possibly. Again, we are looking at this from an Ontario perspective.
Some states limit the amount you can collect up front. Other states require you to pay interest on it. If you don't know, you need to find out.
So, yeah, here in Ontario, post-dated checks, asking for more than first and last month's rent, is all a violation, or demanding, I should say, demanding post-dated checks for how many months, for demanding, you know, a lump sum. So say your rent is $800 and they want you to pay for 12 months. So 800 times 12, not going to do that math off the top of my head, but they want that lump sum of that 12 times 800. Yeah, they can't demand it. They can ask for it. That's not a problem. You can say no. That's not a problem. Unfortunately, they're probably going to use another excuse as to why you didn't get the apartment if you do that, which is a problem. That little caveat should be killed in the RTA, in the Residential Tenancies Act, or at least a new clause put in stating that you cannot ask for more than first, last, and a key deposit. And that you cannot ask for post-dated checks. Not just that you cannot require those. What else was there? Yeah, the interest. Yes. If they ask for and you provide more than first and lasts, and even on last month's, the landlord is required to pay you interest on all deposits like that, except for the key deposit. And paying a lump sum like that 800 times 12, and on last month, they have to pay you interest. Or for last month's, they can take that interest and apply it to the rent increase. As long as they're doing a yearly rent increase, basically that if you make the agreement, that can cancel out the interest. It just gets applied, and then you don't have to pay the difference between what your starting rent was and what your rent for your last month is.
Another thing to consider is your tenant's motivation for paying up front. Why do they have this giant wad of cash sitting around right now? Could it be that they came into some money and...
Why do they have money? None of your fucking business. As a landlord, it's none of your fucking business where your tenants get their money from. As long as it's not through illegal acts that are being done in your apartment, it's none of your business. If a tenant has a lump sum that they want to offer, why don't you just not look a gift horse in the mouth and say, oh, okay. Here's somebody serious about renting my apartment. I've gotten the money up front. Meaning that I'm not going to be chasing them from month to month. Even though I disagree with lump sums myself, you should be thinking that. Not, oh, why do they have so much money? And landlords aren't allowed to ask. They can ask for verification of income. They can ask for verification of that you can pay your rent. They cannot ask where you get your income from, how you plan on paying your rent. It's none of their business. In fact, it's a violation of the Ontario Human Rights Code. One of the protected classes under the Human Rights Code is income status, and finances, meaning they cannot ask. They cannot deny you housing for your income status or your income source. If you're on assistances such as Ontario Works, Ontario Disability Support Program, employment insurance, pension, Canada Pension Plan Disability, they cannot discriminate against you. As long as you can pay the rent, they cannot discriminate against you. So, if you see on an application source of income, ignore it. It's none of their business. If you feel comfortable putting it, fine, put it. Again, it's something that might get you turned down, but you are legally not required to put it, and they are legally not allowed to ask. That source of income should not even be on that application.
They know they'll spend it, so they want to pay their rent up front. Well, what happens when all their upfront rent is gone? Chances are good all the rest of the money is going to be gone too, and then
Again, that's none of your friggin' business. Chances are is if they had all that upfront money, they'd have some sort of savings and probably have some sort of way to save, i.e. a decent paying job. Or yes, they came into money through inheritance, through a settlement. But again, none of your business.
you're going to be chasing a tenant who can't afford your rent. Another thing to think about is maybe they're trying to avoid contact with their landlord for nefarious purposes, such as growing pot or making meth.
Okay, yeah, that is a slight possibility. I will admit that, yes, it would be on the dealer or the cook or supplier or whoever is going to rent that house to grow or cook meth to pay up front a large sum of money for the amount of time that they're going to be there. It just makes sense. The landlord won't be knocking on the door for rent, at least. It is something to consider. I will admit that. But that's going to be a hair of a possibility. A hair of a possibility. Not everyone who's renting is on drugs or sells drugs or makes drugs. So, concession.
Maybe their intent isn't quite so nefarious, but they still don't want you to come around. Perhaps they're renting it out on Airbnb. Of course, there are exceptions to every rule. Perhaps if you're offering student housing, the parents wish to pay the entire expense up front. Tip number 2, tenant screening sneaks. Mr. Brandon Turner wrote an article called Tenant Screening, the Ultimate Guide, and that gives you a really great foundation for your tenant screening. But I've picked up a few extra tips from the geniuses in our forums. Walk them out to their car. Take a peek inside. If their car is strewn stem.
It's none of your business what people's cars look like. Some people basically live in their car. Some people basically work in their car. Just because there's a disorganized mess doesn't mean they're disorganized at home. Or doesn't necessarily mean they're disorganized at home. Some people have, like I said, some people basically live in their car because they're always on the road. They may be a salesperson. They may be, somebody who product demonstrator or promotions who has to go from site to site to site. They may be a security supervisor who has to go from site to site to site, and they have their papers in there and their folders and anything that a site might need. Report, papers, and such.
Stern with garbage and crap, your rental property is most likely going to be treated the exact same way.
No, it's not necessarily going to. Again, like I just explained.
Ask them how many animals they have. Don't ask them if they have animals, because they can say no to that. Asking them how many animals they have tells them you already know they have animals and you just want to know how many.
Okay, in Ontario, it is a violation of the Residential Tenancies Act to say no pets. I believe this was updated in 2016 to the RTA or 18, something like that. Yeah, landlords are no longer required to or allowed to discriminate against pet owners. So yeah, they shouldn't even be asking that. They shouldn't even be putting no pets in the application, the rental lease, or the ads. Now, ads with no pets in are now a violation of the RTA. You can report them to whatever reporting staff the sites have. Will anything be done about it on that end? Probably not, but so yeah, if you move into an apartment that has a no pets clause, you can get a pet. If they try to evict you, you can file with the Residential Tenancy or the Landlord Tenant Board for reasonable interference, etc. And what else was I going to say? It doesn't matter how many pets you have, as long as it's within city bylaw. You can have as many pets as you want. Make sure you're clean with them. Make sure you clean up after them. Clean their pans. Make sure they're not doing damage to the apartment. If they are doing damage to the apartment, or if the apartment is smelling due to unclean conditions, you can be evicted for that, absolutely. The only reason that they can ask pets about pets and say no pets is if the HVAC system is shared with somebody who has pet allergies. And that has to be proven by a doctor's note. And then the landlord can either say, sorry, your next door tenant, the next door neighbor has severe allergies to cats. They can maybe move you floors because it has to be within the immediate area. It can't be you're on the 5th floor, the person with the allergies is on the 1st floor. Yeah. So that's the only reason that they should be asking about pets.
Do not accept people who have animals that will live somewhere else. That animal's only going to live someplace else until they move in.
Again, you can't ask that. And again, in Ontario, that's perfectly legal. If your landlord is insistent, or your potential rent seeker is insistent, that it's no pets with no medical reasoning, well, you can just give your fur baby to somebody for a couple of weeks and then move them in. Is it going to cause problems with them? Probably, but guess what? They've already violated your rights.
Number 3, advertising your rental. Unfortunately, Craigslist is rife with scammers. And a common scam is for someone to take your legitimate listing and take your pictures and use it in their own scam listing. They use their phone number, your address, and their contact information so they get all the phone calls.
This one, I really have nothing to say. I completely am on board with what she's going on about. I'm just popping in to say this is something we will be talking about on a separate video. Rental scams and how to spot them. We will be pulling them from Kijiji and Craigslist and wherever we can find them. And we will be going over the specifics. We will even maybe contact some of them through email and email back and forth and show you how to absolutely recognize these scams.
Commonly, they will tell the potential tenant that they are out of the country and can't get the keys to them, but you should hire,
Yes.
or the tenant should hire a locksmith to come in and change the locks for them. The scammer.
That one I haven't come across, the get a locksmith, simply because the locksmith will ask for some sort of verification, i.e., rental agreement, photo identification letters or whatever coming. They will not do it if you've just moved in. Ethical locksmiths anyway will not do this. Usually what I've seen is, yes, I'm out of the country, I can't get the keys to you right now. If you pay rent, your first and lasts and deposits, because they will ask for deposits, I will mail you the key. Usually you can't go by to view the place. Again, we'll just go over that. I'm gonna, if a point comes up, I'll talk about it here.
Collects the rent money, collects the deposit, and then leaves. You are trying to rent your house, and all of a sudden there's somebody living in there. So how do you keep somebody from stealing your listing? Well, you watermark your images with your phone number and your contact information. They're not going to waste their time trying to erase your information from an image. They'll just go find another listing that doesn't have these marks.
Actually, that's a brilliant idea. So rent seekers, pay attention to that idea. Tenants, pay attention to that idea too, because you can verify if they're stupid enough to post watermarked with the original information and then in the text of the ad their information. That is 100% a scam.
Another tip, never publish the actual address of your home. Publish the nearest.
Yep, that's a good one too.
Cross streets. Cross streets give people a good indication of where the property is located, and then they can decide if they want to investigate further. Tip number 4, leases. You need a good, solid lease. That bare bones lease that you found online is completely worthless, and it gives you absolutely zero protection.
Okay, so regarding leases in Ontario, the province of Ontario has a standard lease that is required by all rent seekers to be used. They cannot write their own. They cannot download it from some website. They have to download from the official website and the official Ontario Standard Lease Agreement. Can they add clauses? Yes, they can add clauses to the lease. Anything they add that violates your rights, either under the Residential Tenancies Act, under another law, under the Ontario Human Rights Code, are deemed void. This means that they cannot enforce them. You cannot sign your rights away. Remember this. For any contract you sign, this is contract law. A lease is a legally binding contract. Under Canadian contract law, you cannot sign a contract and sign your rights away with clauses within that contract. No.
Your lease can't contradict your state's landlord-tenant laws, so you need to make sure you follow those too. But there are plenty of instances that landlord-tenant laws do not cover, such as smoking, pets, parking, painting the interior of the home.
Okay, everything but the pets is applicable to Ontario. Yes, you can discriminate against smokers. Smokers are not a protected class under the Canadian Charter of Human Rights. Smoking is not a right under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. You can say apartments are non-smoking. And exteriors of the property are non-smoking. Again, you cannot say no pets. Parking, yes, should be laid out. You know, how many spots a unit has, how much it costs. Because yes, they can charge an additional fee for parking. Rent seekers can charge an additional fee for parking.
If you want your tenant to know, you need to put it in your lease. Once you have your nice, long, attorney-approved lease, make time to sit down with your tenant and go through the entire thing. Don't assume they're going to read it all. Read it to them. In fact, put a line in front of every paragraph and have them initial as you read it to them.
Actually, this is a really good idea. A lot of rent seekers don't bother to make sure a tenant understands what's in the lease. I would absolutely recommend to rent seekers that they do this. That way, tenants know what's expected of them and what's expected of you. It also, for tenants, never sign a legal contract that you haven't read through every word. It's not like those silly terms of services or user agreements on apps that you just click through. These contracts affect your life.
That later, they can't come back and say, oh, I didn't know. It's in the lease and I told you.
Exactly.
Tip number 5, tenant communication. Can you read minds? I can't. Your tenants can't either. If you want them to know something, you have to tell them. And the best way to tell them is in writing. As of right now, in the state of Colorado, which is where I'm licensed, texting is not currently recognized as a legal method of notification.
Okay, so yes, everything in writing, especially for notifications. In Ontario, texting is an acceptable form of communication for notices of entry only. As long as it's been agreed upon and or used as a communication method that both parties have taken part in. It's understood that that's a form of communication. You cannot send a notification for eviction via text. There are forms that you must fill out and deliver. You cannot send a notification of rent increase. There are forms you must fill out and deliver. You cannot send, say, a notice of eviction for damage to property. Any notice of eviction has to be hand-delivered, and there are forms from the landlord tenant board website that you must use. You cannot write a letter saying, "Dear tenant, you are being evicted on." That is not legal. Yeah, basically everything else. A phone call for anything for notice of entry is not acceptable. It has to be written notice, be it electronically written or printed off on a printer and handed in, written with your hand and handed.
But you know what is? Email. And do you know a recognized method of legal notification in all 50 states plus DC? US Post. If you want your tenant to know something.
Okay. Email is okay again for notice of entry. It's usually not recognized as a form of communication for notices, but right now during COVID, I believe that they are laxed on that. Just so the social distancing is maintained, and I don't know if that's going to come to an end or if that's going to continue. I know the Zoom hearings are going to continue past and are going to be the standardized method for hearings from here on out, which I have a huge problem with, but I'll go into that about another video. Mail, yeah, mail is always acceptable. And yeah.
You have to tell them. Putting it in writing is best because then there's no room for interpretation. Tip number 6 is record keeping. Most of the time, your tenant communications will be smooth sailing. That's because you have screened your tenant properly. But just to make sure, get yourself a notebook. During back to school times, there's like
This goes two ways too. From day one, tenants keep all communications. If it's a text, screenshot it, save it somewhere, save it to Google Drive. If you have a Google account, a Gmail account, you have 15 gigs total to use across Google. Notes and pictures do not take up much space. Audio notes do not take up much space. Small video clips do not take up much space. You can create multiple Google accounts. Save everything. Not just when you're having issues, but save everything. You know, there might be something in one of those little things that can help you down the road. Something like hinting that if you don't comply with the demand that's illegal, that they will issue you an N12 eviction. And that can show bad faith.
10 cents each. Get a notebook and make that solely for keeping communication records with your tenant.
Same for
Whenever they
tenants.
pay rent, write it down. Even if they pay rent on time, you want to establish a clear, complete record-keeping tract.
Right. Tenants, do the same. Make sure you ask for receipts. Make your rent seeker work for even if it's just a little wee bit. Make them work. Make them buy a receipt book, or make them get receipt software that they can send you a receipt. If you ask for it, they must provide it. It is required under the Residential Tenancies Act. If a tenant asks for a receipt, a rent seeker must provide one. And you can go to the landlord tenant board to demand the receipts. If they do not supply them for them, you can ask for monthly receipts. You can ask for a yearly receipt for tax purposes. and they're required to provide it. Especially if you're paying cash or an untraceable mean, because they can claim that you didn't pay if you don't have that receipt. And the onus is on you to prove that you did pay. It's not on them to prove that you didn't. It's called burden of proof. So ask for receipts. When you begin your relationship, try to work it so that you can pay rent via some sort of traceable means. Either check, because most banks now, if you have online banking, they will send you a screenshot of the canceled check that's been cashed. Do it by e-transfer, by Interac e-transfer. Most banks now provide that free, or X number free in your packet, in your package. Yeah, bank to bank transfer, account to account transfer. Yeah, these are all traceable means. You can print out your bank statement and say there, and if you can, especially with e-transfer, you can make a note in it. There's an optional place for a message or note. You can just type in rent for January 2001, and that way that note shows up also on your detailed statement.
Mark down when they have made a repair request and mark down when it was completed. Why? Because you want to be able to prove that you keep good records.
And you want to prove that you did it. Rent seeker or tenant should be doing the same thing. Again, record when you made the request. All requests for repair should be done in writing. Again, email is an acceptable form for that. Text is acceptable. Mail, handwritten, printed, whatever is all acceptable. But it must be done in writing. And then, depending on the severity, the landlord should take care of it. Well, they should be taking care of it as soon as they receive the request, unless it's 3 o'clock in the morning and it's just a doorknob fell off. Now, if it's a water leak, they should be you should be calling them and letting them know. That's something that is an emergency. Gas leak, water leak, anything that's going to cause major damage to your property or their property is pretty much a call them anytime. 2 o'clock in the morning, call them. They need to know. They need to get either themselves out to do the repairs or somebody to do the repairs now. Not in the morning, now. Again, for something, yeah, so.
Anything that goes on between you and your tenant needs to be written down, no matter how small. When the tenancy ends, if nothing ever happens, you just throw the notebook away. But if you ever need to prove anything,
I would recommend for both landlord, rent seekers, and tenants, keep those records for 1 year, for 1 to 2 years, until the statute of limitation runs out on basically anything that one or the other could claim at the landlord-tenant board. Most claims can be made up to 1 year after the incident or after moving out. So I would keep them for I would say up to 2 years, because I know there's some that are 2 years and some that are coming that are going to be changed to 2 years. I believe something like an N12 bad faith, you can file up to 2 years. I think it's September that's going to change.
You are going to thank yourself for having complete records. When it comes to landlording, there is absolutely no reason to reinvent the wheel. With more than 675,000 members, BiggerPockets.com is the place for you to learn about real estate investing.
For rent seekers, I would not recommend this for you because, again, this is a US-based site. If you're dead set on finding a community, search for something in Ontario. Ontario Landlords Watch is for landlords. There are several tenant landlord rights groups on Facebook, or either or. I suggest that you join not only just rent seekers groups, but also groups that are neutral, that have both landlords and tenants.
If you're watching me on YouTube and you liked what you saw, give us a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you can get the next video as soon as it's out.
And that's that one. Okay, so not as bad as I thought it was going to be. There's some actually good advice for both landlords and tenants. And we'll probably watch another one very shortly. Might not be from BiggerPockets, but we'll see. I'm just randomizing them. These are all unscripted, unwatched. So for now, rent is not due. And we will see you next time. Remember, like every other YouTube out there says, subscribe, ring that bell. We now have a Patreon. Check it out below. We'd love to get your support for what we're doing. We have some big plans coming up, but they do require funding. All right. For now, this is Aaron saying toodles.